Chapter 4, The Masterworks, Breakdown of their primary books and arguments. Plato's dialogues are not merely books about Plato. They are living laboratories in which questions are examined, pressed, and transformed through conversation. The masterworks of Plato, the dialogues most often read as the core of his philosophical project, cover a broad spectrum: ethics, epistemology, cosmology, politics, rhetoric, theology, and aesthetics. They do not present a single, tidy system so much as a method and a horizon. The method is dialectic, a patient probing of ideas through questions, objections, and clarifications. The horizon is the ascent from everyday belief to a more secure, stabilizing vision of reality, a world of form, or universal patterns, that gives unity to what we see and judge. In this chapter, we break down Plato's principal dialogues into the clusters that have most shaped Western thought. Each entry identifies the central arguments, the argumentative moves that carry them, and the major interpretive currents that have attended them across 2 millennia. The aim is not to pretend that every dialogue is the same kind of manifesto, rather, it is to show how these masterworks work together to form a cumulative approach to truth, virtue, and life. 1. The Republic, a city, a soul, and the ascent to the good. The Republic is widely regarded as Plato's most ambitious work of political philosophy, but it is best understood as a project that binds political theory to ethics, epistemology, and metaphysics. The central question is deceptively simple: what is justice, and what would a just city and a just soul look like? The dialogue moves toward an emphatic claim: justice in the city mirrors justice in the soul, and knowledge of the good life requires philosophical understanding of the forms, especially the form of the good. Key arguments and moves. The order of knowledge. The Republic lays out a theory of knowledge that culminates in the form of the good, the ultimate source of intelligibility. It introduces the divided line, images, belief, knowledge, and the form of the good, and a hierarchical ascent from opinion to knowledge. The form of the good is not a moral obligation alone, it is the ultimate cause of intelligibility. Without knowledge of the good, the other virtues and the rest of the forms lack unity and direction. The tripartite soul, the city and the soul share a structural analogy. The 3 parts, reason, logos, spirit, thymos, and appetite, epithymia, correspond to the magistrate ruler, the guardian warrior, and the producer class. Virtue arises when each part fulfills its proper role under the leadership of reason. The guardian class and education. The Republic argues for a radical, if controversial, program of education and selection for rulers, the philosopher kings, who must ascend from early childhood to a complete philosophical understanding. Education is not a mere transfer of facts, it is a purification and habituation toward discerning the good. The critique of art and poetry. Plato is wary of poetry and imitation, mimesis, because it imitates appearances rather than reality and can inflame the passions, undermining reasoned judgment. The Republic is thus a map of state censorship and cultural engineering in the name of moral and cognitive health. The noble lie and political legitimacy. The dialogue proposes myths designed to secure social harmony and obedience. The controversial claim is not that lies are good, but that certain myths might sustain a unity that reason alone cannot guarantee in a large polity. The city as an image of a just life. The Republic is not a blueprint for a flawless utopia, it is a thought experiment that makes visible the connections between epistemic virtue, knowledge of the good, and political virtue, justice in the city and the soul. Why it matters. The Republic presses a daring claim: political life can only be truly meaningful when anchored in epistemic assent. Governance is justified by the ruler's understanding of the good, not simply by popular consent or coercive power. It sets the stage for later debates about the nature of virtue, the source of political legitimacy, and the relationship between art, education, and civic well-being. It invites critical scrutiny. Is justice reducible to a rigid class structure? Can the philosopher truly rule without becoming tyrannical in a different register? How credible is the separation between the world of the forms and the world of change? 2. Phaedo, the soul's destiny and arguments for immortality. Phaedo, set at the moment of Socrates' death, moves from a narrative of loss to a rigorous defense of a particular metaphysical outlook, the soul's immortality and its affinity to the eternal forms. It is both a consolation and a challenge to a life lived in preparation for death. Key arguments and moves. The theory of recollection. Anamnesis learning is a process of recollecting knowledge that the soul grasped before birth. This argument models knowledge as something already within us, accessed through questioning rather than mere sensory accumulation. The argument from opposites. Things come to be from their opposites, hot from cold, large from small. The soul's life before birth and after death is connected through a chain of opposites, implying continuity beyond physical life. The affinity argument. The soul resembles the immaterial, invisible, intangible realm more than the body does. The soul's nature inclines it toward the realm of the forms and away from sensory decay. The final argument. Cyclical motion and the soul's imprisonment. The soul is bound to a cycle of birth and death, and its purification depends on its alignment with the eternal and unchanging forms. The myth of the afterlife and moral seriousness. If the soul is tied to virtue and wisdom, death should be a release rather than a catastrophe. The ethical life is not extinguished by death because the soul carries its knowledge and character into the next life. Why it matters. Phaedo defends a robust form of dualism at the level of soul and body, and it embeds ethics in a cosmology where true knowledge requires turning away from temporary pleasures and toward enduring realities. The dialogue crystallizes Plato's conviction that philosophy is a practice of turning away from deceptive appearances and toward a stable, intelligible order. It raises perennial questions about personal identity, the fate of the soul, and the means by which a life can remain meaningful after a body's end. 3. The Symposium and Phaedrus, Love, Beauty, Rhetoric, and the Ascent of the Soul. Two companion dialogues, the Symposium and Phaedrus, illuminate a central human force, love, eros. They are less a system of metaphysics than a set of exploratory case studies showing how beauty, desire, rhetoric, and the good life intertwine. The Symposium. A sequence of speeches on love, culminating in a transcendent account by Socrates, as channeled through Diotima. The ladder of beauty is a stepwise ascent from physical attraction to the form of beauty itself, culminating in the apprehension of the good beyond any particular thing. The role of the lover and the beloved, eros, binds people to share in the ascent toward truth. Love is not merely sexual or romantic, it is an ethical and epistemic mobilizer. The status of the beloved, beauty in the many forms, is a gateway to the one form of beauty. This is where ethics, aesthetics, and metaphysics cohere. The social and political implications, love as a force that motivates moral improvement and philosophical education, the ideal of companionship in the pursuit of wisdom. Phaedrus. The dialogue broadens the ethical scope to rhetoric and the art of persuasion. Socratic rhetoric must rest on truth and knowledge rather than mere technique or fame. The charioteer myth, the two horses and a steering intellect, presents the soul's conflict between reason and passion. The successful philosopher must train and temper the passions to serve the good. The critique of writing, as an external memory, cannot cultivate understanding or genuine discourse. Dialogue remains a living, mutual search after truth. The engagement with erotic desire as potentially divine, or at least transformative, when rightly understood and oriented toward higher goods. Why they matter? They show Plato's late middle point where ethics, epistemology, and aesthetics converge around a robust conception of the good life as a disciplined ascent toward truth through love and reason. They disclose a nuanced, less political, but deeply formative side of Plato's project, how persons become capable of living wisely, and how speech can be a force for or against truth. 4. Protagoras, Gorgias, Meno, Euthyphro, Laches, Charmides, virtues, rhetoric, and definitions. These early and middle period dialogues cluster key concerns that recur across the corpus: whether virtue can be taught, what counts as knowledge versus opinion, what piety is, and how courage is understood. Protagoras, can virtue be taught? The dialogue challenges the claim that virtuous conduct can be boiled down to a single craft or taught by master teachers. It is a rehearsal of competing paradigms of virtue and a test of whether a consistent, teachable science of virtue exists. Gorgias, is rhetoric merely powerful persuasion, or is it inseparable from justice and wisdom? Socrates argues that rhetoric without knowledge of the good is dangerous and morally bankrupt. The dialogue stores up a crucial critique of the relationship between power and virtue. Meno, the paradox of inquiry. How can you search for something you do not know? The paradox pushes the reader toward the theory of recollection and the deeper claim that knowledge is not acquired by chance but recovered through reasoned inquiry. Euthyphro, what counts as piety? The Euthyphro dilemma tests whether holiness is piously loved by the gods or if the gods love what is holy because it is holy. The dialogue probes the problem of grounding moral properties in divine command versus independent standard. Laches and Charmides, these dialogues examine courage and temperance, self-control, and challenge whether virtue is a single thing or a set of related traits. They highlight the importance of precisely defining the virtues before one can teach or acquire them. Why they matter? They frame a core intellectual project to understand the nature of virtue, the foundations of knowledge, and the conditions under which a person can live rightly. They introduce methodological issues that reappear in later works: how to define terms, how to test claims, and how to distinguish appearance from reality. 5. Cratylus, Timaeus, and the cosmological imagination. The remaining core dialogues illuminate Plato's speculative ranges, how the world is made, and what language can tell us about truth. Cratylus. Language and naming, are names natural reflections of reality or conventional labels? The dialogue surveys two extremes: Heraclitus's view that names reflect the flux of becoming and Socrates' suspicion that names can mislead unless anchored in something stable. The deeper claim is that truth and knowledge require correct apprehension of the forms that lie behind sensible things, even as language remains a necessary but imperfect instrument. Timaeus. A comprehensive cosmology, the demiurge, craftsman god, orders the cosmos by imitating the eternal forms. The world soul animates the cosmos, time is the after-effect of motion and change. The natural philosophy embedded in Timaeus, order, proportion, necessity, and reason, reflects a coherent, though not unproblematic, attempt to explain the structure of the visible world as an intelligible image of the forms. The dialogue also hints at physiology, astronomy, and the moral psychology of human beings as miniatures of the cosmic order. Why they matter? They broaden philosophy from ethical-political questions to metaphysical and cosmological scaffolding. Plato shows how a coherent account of reality requires an account of its beginnings, order, and intelligibility. They invite critical scrutiny of the limits of human knowledge. Even when we understand order, the precise mechanisms of creation and the destiny of the soul remain subjects of deep, open inquiry. 6. The laws, philosophy as a practical art of governance. If the Republic is the bold, aspirational blueprint, the laws is the more grounded, cautious, and pragmatic counterpart. The laws articulate a legal and political framework for a well-ordered state, with an emphasis on stability, commonwealth, and a legal order that governs daily life. The tone is less utopian and more realistic about human passions, social cohesion, and the need for institutional checks. It preserves a belief in the educational and moral role of law, but it concedes scope to tradition, custom, and gradual reform. The laws also revisits the role of philosophy in the polis, suggesting that rulers and citizens alike must cultivate virtue, discipline, and an interest in the common good, without insisting on the radical philosophical reconstruction of society that the Republic imagines. Why it matters? It shows Plato's adaptive sense of philosophy's reach. He moves from a high, theoretical ideal to a practical, enforceable structure that governs life as citizens inhabit it. It provides a counterweight to utopian visions, highlighting the tension between the perfect form of justice and the messy, often compromised realities of political life. 7. Apology, Crito, and the moral portrait of Socrates. The Apology is not a defense speech in the courtroom sense but a philosophical testament to the life of inquiry. Crito presents a companion meditation on civil obligation and the limits of personal loyalty when it conflicts with the law and the higher demands of truth. Apology, Socrates defends his method, his commitment to the examined life, and his obligation to question authority for the sake of moral truth. He accepts the penalty he faces rather than retreat from intellectual integrity. Crito, the dialogue tests whether it is right to escape prison to preserve life or to honor one's obligations to the laws and the social order. The outcome emphasizes the supremacy of principle over personal convenience. Why they matter? They foreground the character of the philosopher as a figure whose life is inseparable from his investigations. The dialogues show how philosophical integrity can demand personal sacrifice. They also illustrate Plato's insistence that philosophy has a social and political dimension. Truth-telling in the public arena is a form of civic duty. 8. Method and reading, how to approach the masterworks. A distinctive feature of Plato's dialogues is not just what they argue, but how they argue. Reading them as systematic treatises can misrepresent both method and aim. The dialogic method, every dialogue stage is a question and a sequence of responses. The aim is not to deliver a finished theory at once, but to encourage a disciplined turning and refining of thought. The indispensability of dialectic, the answer, often comes with a qualification or further question. The masterworks are built on an edge of aporetic moments, the recognition that a problem resists simplification. The interpretive caution about unity, the dialogues form a mosaic rather than a seamless system. The forms, the soul, the state, and knowledge interweave with different emphases across works. One should read the dialogues in dialogue with one another, not for a single final doctrine. The historical and literary dimensions, the guest speakers, the dramatic settings, and even the dramatization of Socrates as a character invite attention to rhetoric, pedagogy, and the life of inquiry itself. The masterworks in historical perspective. Plato's principal dialogues have had a double life. They shaped ancient philosophy and they provided templates for centuries of thought in the Western tradition. In antiquity, they inspired Aristotle and the Academy, and they provoked polemics from sophists and skeptics. In modernity, they fed debates about the nature of knowledge, the meaning of virtue, and the foundation of political authority. In contemporary philosophy, they still serve as touchstones for discussions about ethics, epistemology, philosophy of mind, and political theory. A critical guardrail for readers today is to avoid reducing Plato to a single doctrine. He himself invites us to attend to the particular context of each dialogue, to notice how a question is posed, and to observe how a position is defended, revised, or challenged. The masterworks do not simply terminate in a system, they invite ongoing engagement with who we might become as seekers of truth. What to take away from the masterworks? A shared structure. In several dialogues, the move from belief to knowledge hinges on an ascent to the form, an abstract, perfect pattern that underwrites the sensible world. The good is not a moral postscript but the keystone of intelligibility. A method of moral psychology, Plato's interest in the soul's structure, reason, appetite, spirit, offers a grammar for understanding human motivation, desire, and virtue. The alignment of inner life with rational order emerges as essential for a good life. A political imagination, the Republic's Philosopher King remains a provocative case study about legitimate authority, justice, and the education of citizens. The Laws provides a practical counterweight that asks what is realistically sustainable in a political community. The role of rhetoric and art, Plato's critical stance toward rhetoric and poetry has generated enduring debates about the power of storytelling, persuasion, and culture to shape moral life. The nature of inquiry itself, the masterworks model a disciplined life of questioning, refutation, and partial answers. They invite readers to cultivate a similar rhythm of doubt and assent, a way of thinking, not just a set of conclusions. A note on access and interpretation. No single reading of Plato's masterworks is sufficient to capture their richness. Different interpreters have highlighted various strands: the rationalist, metaphysical core of the forms, the political critique that challenges democracy, the moral psychology of the soul, the literary art of the dialogues themselves. Readers are well advised to approach these texts with both patience and critical attention, to follow the argumentative threads, to test the counter-arguments, and to reflect on how the dialogues relate to one another across a lifetime of reading. In this chapter, we have attempted a map rather than a final verdict. The masterworks are, in the most literal sense, moving targets, ever ready to provoke, challenge, and refine the ways we think about knowledge, virtue, and life itself. Closing reflections: the enduring labor of philosophy. Plato's principal dialogues are, at heart, a call to a way of life, to question, to seek, to judge, and to refine one's understanding in light of reason and integrity. The masterworks do not merely present answers, they show the form of a human life in which thinking itself becomes a practice of courage, restraint, and hope. The Republic asks what justice demands of us collectively and individually. Phaedo asks what death reveals about the nature of the self. The Symposium and Phaedrus invite us to see love and speech as forces shaping our ascent toward truth. Protagoras, Gorgias, Meno, Euthyphro, Laches, and Charmides train us to scrutinize our concepts and commitments. Cratylus, Timaeus, and Laws broaden the horizon to language and cosmos and law. Apology and Crito remind us that truth-telling in the face of danger is a brave form of citizenship. If you enter the masterworks with an open mind and a rigorous spirit, you will discover that they do not merely advocate a philosophy. They model a way of life, one that takes questions seriously, refuses easy answers, and invites us to become more thoughtful, more just, and more alive to the beauty and mystery of the world we inhabit. The portrait of the philosopher, Plato, is not only a history of ideas, it is a guide to becoming a person who can bear the burden and the light of reason. The masterworks invite us to continue the dialogue, for life, for truth, and for the good.